thrust the pole straight through, right, into the center. As you get more and more proficient, you can relax, right, and maneuver the pole so that it is freely rising and falling with the stance. This will give you power and impetus. So I take his pole, get it out of the way, and I guide it, and then I throw his pole, and it's vibrating up, out, down, up, out, down, up, out, down, up, out, down, up, out. Welcome to the third DVD in this series. I'll be introducing the Wing Chun pole. As you can see, the Wing Chun pole is very long. I'm 6'1". This pole is about 8 feet long, and it is a heavy pole. We'll be using this pole as a training pole, and then we'll also be using some practice fighting poles, which we use the white waxwood pole instead of the hardwood pole. So Wing Chun pole, typically you want to measure a pole that is about as long as your outstretched hand, and if it exceeds that, then that's fine too. So we want you to be careful in choosing the correct pole for you. The Wing Chun pole has various positions when you're facing an opponent. This first position is what I refer to as the hungry dragon, or 火龍石. The hungry dragon is a low ready position when you're facing your opponent. It shows supreme confidence in the situation. Next position is Zhong position. This is the standard position in the Wing Chun pole. Your eyes looking at the hip. You're in what we call the Dingji-ma. Dingji-ma is the cat stance. Third position is a high upper guard position. This is usually used as a transition to protect against high attacks. So this is how I grip the pole so that my hand is not strong. In starting the Wing Chun pole, you must hold it properly. And the width is determined from the length of your grip to your armpit. Grabbing the pole, make sure you grab the back so that nothing of the pole protrudes. And the width of your grip is slightly larger than it would do in the on-guard position. If you're very good and very strong, and your pole is very good and balanced, you can hold the position as you would do the grip. However, it is a yin and yang grip. One hand is facing up, palm up, the other is palm down. There are various stances with the pole. Stances include the Wen Ma. Wen Ma's first stance is the low horse stance. Toes are pointing out, and the weight is up. This is also called the four-level stance, or quadrilateral stance. Head is level, the shoulders are level, thighs are level, the feet are level. This is a preparatory position for attacking the pole. Your eyes, please look at the pole. Second stance, heel ma. Most of the weight is in the back leg, and you hold the pole against your pelvis to get the most strength. The front leg has about 1% to 10% of your weight. The back leg, of course, supports the most of it. And finally, there's what we call Gongji-ma. Gongji-ma is the forward stance that you find in various Shaolin systems. Because the pole is the male contribution to the Wing Chun system, we use the bigger Shaolin stances. Why study the Wing Chun pole? After you study the empty hand Wing Chun, you learn the three forms, you learn the Wun dummy, you learn the Chi So and sticking leg techniques and practice, and you then learn the pole. The pole is for you to unify and solidify the body and be able to absorb and generate force. One of my students referred to it as finishing school for body structure. The Wing Chun pole was created because the opera performers who created Wing Chun were on a flat-bottom boat, an opera boat or junk. And because these boats operated in shallow water, you had to use poles to guide the boat when it came to very shallow water and to push off if you're stuck, push against the ground or against a rocky cliff to position yourself. So you would take a stance and push. So the unique attacking of the Wing Chun pole is from pushing, using the pole to push the boat out of a dangerous situation. All right. As generations changed and came, and what happened was the pole is one of the most popular weapons in southern China. They adopted the pole methodology to the basic poling position and able to use it as a weapon. A 6.5 point staff, many people think that it has only 6.5 techniques. It's not quite correct. Actually, the actual number of techniques and movements that you can do with it can number about 108 in variation. However, there are a few basic maneuvers, and we conceptually use the points of the pole to help us in doing the variations. So you have up to 108 movements in variation on the right side, and then you can vary that with 108 movements on the left side, leading to a total of 216 movements. However, the basic pole maneuver requires you to use the various lines. What I've broken it down to is 6.5 lines of motion. And if you do these 6.5 lines of motion, it doesn't matter what pole form you do and what the sequence is, as long as you have all of these, then you're doing the Wing Chun 6.5 point pole. The first line of motion requires that you are in this vertical plane. So it goes all the way up in front of you. It's your side center line. It is the center line that you use with the shoulder and initiates a whole plane of motion on this first center line. All right, so it goes from the lowest to the highest point. So the lowest to the highest point, I'll demonstrate. The first maneuver that I generally teach my students is what we call Dangguan and Tiuguan. Okay, these two motions represent this the apex and the depth, right? The zenith and apex of the pole movement. All right, from understanding those two basic lines, then we can understand the next two lines, which is in between those. So first one is tok, second one is called sa, right? Tok and sa. And then the final of these is right in the center, and it's us to do extension, and it's what we call bilguan. Okay? So coming out, extension, bilguan. So this is the first concept of the center line of the 6.5 point pole. Okay, so you need to know at least these 5 motions related to this first concept. Okay, the rest is simple. From there, we have the second point, which is doing Tanguan. Tanguan is like Tan Sao of Wing Chun. Is the palm is up. Because the palm is up, you're using this to spread the opponent's energy with the pole. Okay? So that's the next motion. I'll show you from the side. So showing you from the side, the pole is moved at a diagonal angle, and you manipulate this not with your arms, otherwise it's too heavy. You need to move it with your pelvis. Okay, so you have the power. All right. The next important angle is what we call butguan or ganguan. But means to remove, and we use the chest or sternum as our pelvis in this case. And in this case, because we're using a heavy object, we can use it to brace against our body. So you have 3 points of contact: the 2 hands and the body position. All right? The next point is fukguan. Again, using the pelvis as your brace, and your hand is facing downward, like fuksao in Wing Chun. Okay, so fukguan is your pole is on top of your opponent's pole. Finally, we have lo sui guan, Low is again using the sternum or chest as your protection and stabilizer, so that you're not just rolling all over the place. Okay? If you're particularly strong, you don't need it. You can have enough bracing from your stance and your body structure and your hands alone. That's good enough. All right? But optimally, if you're coming against a very strong object, you need to move, then you need to use your sternum as a bracing point. Finally, the sixth line is languan, okay, which is finishing the pole. And often people ask, what's the half point? In my jargon, the way I use it, half point is simply a circle in the basic area, because it encompasses all the motions and enters into the center line. So again, from the center line down, and we have this angle, this angle, this angle, and this angle, and then finally horizontal and a circular motion. Okay, and these are the basic idea behind the 6.5 point pole. I studied many different variations of the southern pole, because the pole was the major fighting weapon of southern China. It's basically a spear without the spear tip. Everyone, what they did was, when it came to settling disputes amongst martial artists, they all did so with the pole. So every major southern fist system has a pole system within their system. In doing so, I came across one of the famous masters in New York Chinatown. His name was Lu Yuansang, and I became his disciple back in 1980s. Master Lui attracted most of the southern fist martial artists in New York Chinatown and was able to disseminate his teachings. Before he passed on, he wrote a series of articles and books in the martial arts magazine called Wu Lin, or it's also called Mo Lam in Cantonese, and he delineated and spread out his teachings. Since I was one of his last disciples, I decided to incorporate and preserve some of his teachings in my pole teachings as well. So I'm going to introduce the 6 major pole teachings that he taught and how they fit in with Wing Chun. So the first one is what we call the live and dead gate. When Master Lui taught me, he said that the live gate is where you can hit your opponent can hit you. The staff is still alive. All right? What you need to do is move into the opponent's dead gate so that he cannot hit you with his staff, but meanwhile, you can still control and hit him. All right? And I have my partner, Rafi, to demonstrate with me. All right. So in illustrating the live gate, what we mean is our opponent attacks us. If he strikes us in the temple, okay, then I have to be out of the way and still be able to strike him. Obviously, he's able to still strike me too. If he swings his pole, comes to me and hits me, he can still hit me just by changing his position, right? So what I would need to do is then move into the live gate as well, so that I can change and hit with him, or move into a position where he's not as lively, where I can hit him in the dead gate. Okay, he's in the dead gate. I'm in the live gate now. All right, the next major teaching is the live staff and dead staff. If the staff can move or about, then it's a live staff. If the staff is restrained, it's a dead staff. You cannot move the staff freely, it's a dead staff. So it's a little bit different than live gate and dead gate, and so I'll demonstrate right now. Okay. The staff moving freely, I can hit him anywhere I want to, right? But if I constrain him, he cannot move his staff. His staff is dead. Right? Or I knock his staff down, his staff is dead. He cannot move his staff. If he tries to move his staff, if my staff is lively, I can simply take another angle and strike it. The next important portion is we have to understand the PowerPoint. And I don't mean the software. The PowerPoint here is using the last 6 inches of the pole. If you can focus it even more, you can focus it the last 3 inches. That is the first inch of, or last inch of the pole, the actual tip of the pole and then the opposite side. So you have the last 3 inches. You want to focus all your power in that. So always be mindful of how you focus power. The pole, you can focus power all throughout its length, but in order for it to be very powerful, you're using the strength of your whole body and the strength of both arms to initiate and focus and use in a small tip. In doing so, you have devastating force. One strike is enough to kill or injure your opponent. Usually when we use the pole to illustrate the PowerPoint, then I need you to see how powerful the pole can actually be. So we do a basic exercise, okay? And we're just using striking the staff as a basic exercise. He comes in and attacks, boom, I use the pole for power, okay? Again, if he attacks, okay, simply using the body mechanics and the hands and the focus of power in the tip, you're able to get devastating power. Another variation of this is if I lift the pole up, okay, I make his pole fly. All right, the reason why is because I'm able to focus my energy through the weapon to the tip. In the pole, you have also the circle and the point, what we call Chun III in Chinese. It doesn't mean just one technique of Chun III, but this is a concept. It means that the pole can reach and attack in a complete circle. This whole circle is able to move, and if you're in that, within the circumference of this circle, okay, and within the circle, you're in danger of the pole. And then the next thing about the pole is the pole can stab and strike along any of these 360 degrees of angle in the circle. So you have to be able to know your distance and judge your distance when you're entering the circle and exiting the circle. And this circle means the circle width of the pole, how far you can enter in and how close you can enter in. Unlike, let's say, Japanese or Okinawan systems of using the pole, we don't take a 6-foot weapon and make it 1.5 feet by grabbing it in the center. Okay, it makes it inefficient for us. We want to use the full length of the pole to keep our opponent at bay. Okay, this is because in southern China, you would have fights along fields to determine who's better with the pole. So in the circle, I of course want to keep out of his circle, okay, because that's a danger point for me. So what I want to do is I want to move into a pocket. When the staff passes, then I'm able to attack, all right? Then I've created a point along the circle. Okay, similarly, if he moves the other way, I want to be able to move outside the line and strike him. Okay, so again, if he is striking this way, I want to strike in this manner. So that's the circle and the point. All right, if he comes the other way, I want to knock him and strike him. All right. Now, in all of these motions, in the circle and point, the point is really striking the opponent. You either strike the opponent's hand, which is grasping the staff, or you're striking the opponent's body directly. Okay, and striking the opponent's body directly, your aim is to wound him or stop him from further attacks. The next concept is distance and speed. It's very much related to the circle and the point. In this, it talks about entering at the correct angles and the distance and having a correct speed and timing. So when the opponent is swinging his pole in a horizontal way, okay, then I have to understand and time it. If I don't come in, if I come in at the wrong time, he'll strike me with the pole, okay? He'll stab me or he'll strike me with the pole, right? Now, if what I have to do is I have to wait till the pole passes and then create this Y, okay? It looks like a horizontal Y with the pole. All right. It also looks like the Chinese character for entry, we call yap. Okay, and so if the opponent goes the opposite way, where he pulls his pole back, then I have a point of entry in this way. So the importance here is how to enter in. Entering in also requires you to have the footwork. Footwork is based on the 5 elements and bagua, but in simple terms, 5 elements simply means you're in the center, you go forward, you go backward, you go left, and you go right. And Bagua means 8 directions. That means you have the basic 5 cardinal positions or 4 cardinal positions and the center, and then you go off the angles on them. So understanding those, you're able to enter in properly at all times. All right, there's also a final concept of what we call the old pole and the young pole. The old pole cannot move freely. It's jammed, it's restrained, it doesn't move very well. Okay, that means the opponent is on top of my pole, and my pole is not quite a dead pole, but I can move it a little bit. All right, he's got a lot of pressure on me. I can move it just slightly, right? So a live pole means it's a nimble pole. I'm able to move about freely and strike my opponent, right? My opponent is confused by my attitude and how many angles I can strike at every time. The problem with Wing Chun's pole is that a lot of pole teachers have not done sufficient research in other pole methods. They only learn Wing Chun's pole. As a result, they don't know how to use it very well. What happens is they have a tendency, when the opponent strikes, they block it and then they strike the opponent and then strike him again. That's almost equivalent to block and then strike. It's very slow. That's in fact a very, very low level of martial arts. Or they think what should happen is I block, he stabs again, I block, he stabs again, I block, right? And that's all they know. They only know to stand in one plane and without horizontal movement or inside angles or varying the angles. As a result of it, their understanding of the pole is very, very limited. It's inefficient that way. What should happen is the pole needs subtle angles, okay? It's just very slipping by the motion, okay? The idea is you just barely evade and then able to attack and slip in. Control the pole and strike the pole, strike the opponent. So what happens here is don't bother to block the weapon. Just strike the opponent's hand, okay? That's what we mean by Wing Chun saying the staff only has one sound, or actually Wing Chun staff does not have 2 sounds. 2 sounds is this, and then strike, okay? It means strike once and then strike. You finish him, you killed him, you wounded him. That's the idea behind it. So the idea behind the Wing Chun pole is strike in one sound, right? In one shot, in one timing, immediately hit him. That means hit the lead hand, hit the lead arm, hit the lead wrist, whatever you want to hit, all right? And then finish him off, okay? You struck him and then you struck him again and struck him again. The reason why you want to destroy the lead hand initially is because since this weapon requires 2 hands for operation, once you destroy one hand, he cannot control the weapon anymore. That's the end of the battle. So the Filipino martial arts have a saying of calling this defanging the snake is correct. Defanging the snake is correct. You strike once, the opponent drops his weapon, he cannot continue, right? Especially if his hands are broken, his fingers are broken. Right? With a long weapon like the pole, it can be devastating because what? All the power of the body and the arms is concentrated in a small space. As a result of it, the pressure is very great. The amount of power it strikes with is very great. So usually 1 or 2 shots, that's the end of the conflict. The following sequences of movements are the basic movements of the 6.5 point pole, so then you can get an understanding of why we can have up to 108 motions on one side with the pole. So that everything else is a variation of these major motions. So I have my student John Cheng here, who's going to be demonstrating the movements of the pole, and I'll be talking him through it as well as assisting him in his form, so that you understand. The first motion is what we call the Biu Long Cheng, the darting dragon pole. Now I know some of the Wing Chun people out there call their pole the dragon pole, which is kind of ridiculous because in Chinese we call this the Xu Mei Guan, the rat tail pole, because it looks like a rat's tail. And it's not called a dragon pole. The reason why people call it dragon pole, I assume, is for public consumption because they associate dragon boat races. But if you look at dragon boat races, they don't use a pole. they use paddles. So it's ridiculous to call it a dragon pole. So I want to say, for the record, call it the rat tail pole, call it the 6.5 point pole, call it the long staff, call it the single head staff, that's fine. But dragon pole, out of the question. But this basic motion is what we call the darting dragon pole. Okay? In this, John gets into the guan ma, or sei ping ma, which is the basic stance. His legs are parallel, and he holds the pole about the width of his shoulders, maybe even a little bit bigger. And then he thrusts the pole straight through, right, into the center line. Again, he pulls back the pole, and he thrusts through again. And one more time, he thrusts through. All right, and so this is the basic spearing motion, what we call biu long cheng. Again, the darting dragon pole. As I mentioned before, the staff requires you to have good footwork. So most of the motions should not be trained stationary. If you just train them stationary, what happens is you don't have the proper amount of power, and you don't have enough body power or body alignment to be able to do your motions. So in this series, I'll be demonstrating the variations. Now, John is going to be doing the same thrusting, but he's going to do left and right thrusting, okay? In this position, he takes the basic pole position, holds it up, and then moves left and right laterally while he thrusts the pole. So this is the left and right biu long cheng, okay? Zhao yao biu long cheng. All right, again, a few more times. Thrusting on the left and then thrusting on the right. Again, thrusting, and then stepping back and thrusting. Very good. When you're comfortable with thrusting left and right, then you want to practice thrusting forward and backwards. So John is going to be stepping forward with the stance, right? Just like in the Wing Chun stance, you keep your weight balance, and the front leg, if it moves up 8 inches, the back leg moves up 8 inches. And then he steps back, the rear leg moves back, and then he moves and thrusts. Okay? Again, a little faster, going forward, and then going back, going forward, and going back. Again, going forward, and going back. Since we know front and back, left and right, then we have to start practicing the angles. And with this, what we do is we do angles off of the basic step. So John is going to be demonstrating the angles. So going straight at the angle, and then stepping off the angle and thrusting. And again, thrusting and thrusting. Right, so very good. So you understand the various angles. All right. So in action, it goes 1, 2. 1, 2. The next major motion you have to learn is because the Wing Chun pole form actually finishes with every motion in this, or every section with this motion. It's called dang and tiu. Dang is hammering downward, going all the way down. Tiu is the staff jumps upward, all the way up. Okay, it's to handle any motions that might attack the center line, all right, at a distance. So he focuses his energy at the tip. Usually you practice hitting walnuts, or hitting coins, or hitting pebbles, or other small objects. You know, you got mice or rats in the basement. You might want to practice with that too. All right. So this is a good way to practice. So striking down the angle and up. So basic motion. This is stationary. What's important is that the staff has to have 3 points of contact. That is the pelvis, and then the left and right hand have to stabilize it across the pelvis. In this way, you have a merging of body structure and gravity to assist you in using the pole. Since the pole is well balanced and the heavier section is in the back, what happens is it gets counterbalanced when you put this against your hip. If you were to just do it with your arms alone, you'd be fatigued. Okay? So John's going to show it again with the proper body motion. Down and up. Okay, down and up. Okay. All right, so you move your body up, your body is actually raised, and then you drop down in your cat stance. Notice my cat stance is very high, right? So when I drop down, I strike down, I bend into my stance then, okay? And you merge with gravity when you do it. And when I pull my pole up, what happens is I use this like a shovel where I lift up the pole. I lift up the pole. Strike down, lift up. Strike down, lift up. Strike down, lift up. The stance has to be mobile. And so what you have to do is use the stance and steps to coordinate with the pole. And here we're going to do the same exercise, dang and tilt. But what happens is John is going to be using his footwork left and right in the cat stance. So John chooses a point and then strikes that point down. And then moves laterally, strikes, and moves again. Right, and then continue. All right, very good. So the next thing is we want to practice the movements in between. So we do tok and sat. Typically, what we do is we lift up the hands in the basic position and then drop the pole down, all right? Lift the hands up and drop the pole down. Lift the hands up and drop the pole down. You want to be as level as possible. The first motion is what we call tok. Tok means to uplift, like tok sao in the Wing Chun position. So what happens is he lifts the pole up and it's very strong from the tip. He's able to focus his power. And the next motion is called satwan. Sat means finishing, okay? And he is able to issue his force downward on a level plane, all right? In this way, he's able to cover in the first line of motion the middle 2 points, okay? So we started out with the thrusting, then we started out with the extremes of down and up. Now we have the middle of down and up. All right, so sometimes when you're doing the basic motions of the pole, you don't have enough power. So I'm going to demonstrate a few of the exercises or preparatory exercises that you need to practice on a regular basis to give you more power with the pole. All right, and so I have my student Rafi here. Rafi is going to be demonstrating the basic, what we call tanguan exercise. So here he stands in the basic Wing Chun stance, and his body structure is all aligned. He lifts the pole up to the center of his chest, okay, lifting it up first, right, and keeping the elbows in, keeping his grip straight, focusing his attention at the tip of the pole. And then he swings it downward as if though he was wringing a towel, okay? If done properly, you will see the tip of the pole bounce and vibrate. All right? What's very important when doing this exercise is paying the attention to the body structure. The stance, the Yiji Kerama of Wing Chun, the basic stance of Wing Chun, has to rise and fall. So up and down to give the power. Okay? So holding the basic position and vibrating up. You see the tip vibrate, and you know you've accomplished the power in this exercise. All right, there's a variation of this exercise where we introduce the thrust to it. Okay, and this is the two-handed thrust with the pole. So again, Rafi's doing it, and he starts up, extending out, and then down. So this teaches you the 4 basic powers of Wing Chun. Up, down, in, and out, all right? And you have to apply this with the pole. A few more times, Rafi, please. So, extending out, back, down, up, out, 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 down. If you have weak wrists, what you need to do is do the basic wrist exercise. You stand in the basic Wing Chun stance. The tip of the pole is in your center line, from your nose down and extends. And then you grip the pole at the end of the pole and simply use the Wing Chun fist to pull the tip up, okay? And then you do it a few reps and then do it on the opposite side, okay? This way you have strength in your forearms and wrist connection. So he sinks down in his stance a little bit, and then he coordinates that power to lift and up and down with the pole. Very good. All right, opposite side, lifting, up and down, up and down, up and down. All All right, I'm going to demonstrate the four corners drill. And so in four corners, it's like the four corners of fencing in that you choose an imaginary square or rectangle in front of you, okay? And you don't want it to be too high or you don't want it to be too low. But what you want to do is exercise the tip of the staff so that you're able to control it with your stance, your hands, and your body in unison. So you go for the first angle, then the next, then the next, then the next, okay? And you repeat this sequence in a counterclockwise fashion. So the motion is going counterclockwise, right? As you get more and more proficient, you can relax, right? And then control. As I said, if you have many years experience with the pole, you don't always have to brace it against your hip or pelvis, and it depends on if you're used to the weight of the pole. Later, what you can do is do variations of this. So you might start out clockwise. So you do the same motion, but everything is done in a clockwise manner. Okay? Or later on, what you can do is mix and match. So go from one angle to the next angle, 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 and so on. Okay? So you can steer the rudder as best you can. Related to the four corners drill is what I call the figure 8 drill. In this manner, what you want to do is move the pole in a horizontal figure 8, kind of like the infinity sign. So you have the pole lifted up and then simply maneuver the pole so that it is freely in a figure 8 pattern. Since the figure 8 moves into one point at all times, you can use that as a striking point or focus point. So I'll demonstrate. So first you do the figure 8, and as you know, the figure 8 comes into the middle. From here you strike down, strike down, strike down, strike down. Those are the two easiest ones. Then you can go strike up and strike up with the pole. So strike up, strike up, strike down, and strike down. That's the figure 8 with the strikes. The two previous exercises of four corners and figure 8 can be combined. So at every angle, you can combine the figure 8. So every angle, you combine the figure 8. Every angle, combine the figure 8. Every angle, combine the figure 8. So this way, you can freely move in all angles and control the pole. When you're doing the figure 8s, do understand that you can rotate the axis in which you're doing it. Instead of doing a horizontal infinity sign, what you can do is do a diagonal infinity sign. And with that, you simply move, and your range of motion with your body is going to be greater. The reason why you want to do this is so that you exercise your stance and your pelvis for coordination. So it's a big diagonal. The figure 8 exercise can also be done on a vertical plane. And in this case, you lift up the pole and you go and trace motions. See, Wing Chun stance, a lot of people say, oh, you have to be fixed. It's not fixed. It's actually quite dynamic. So in doing these exercises, what you're doing is rising and falling with the stance. This will give you power and impetus when you're striking with the weapon. So we typically do the next angles. As I said, you have the center line. Once you know all the attacks on the center line, you're able to freely use this with every one of the major angles. So in this case, we're going to demonstrate the Tanguan. Now John is going to demonstrate Tanguan. What he is he's in his cat stance and he uses his pelvis and turns his wrists just slightly to use the pole out of the way. He shouldn't even have to get too far out of his body, so you can do even a smaller motion than that one. So again, try that again. One time in the center line and then just out. So this angle, we use it as a projection of force, of guiding the opponent or knocking his pole out of the way. Once you understand this angle, what you do is you combine it with the major attacks along the center line. So for example, John will do the sequence where he does Tan Guan first, and then Biu Long Cheng. Okay, again, same thing, Tan Guan and Biu Long Cheng. And another one where he does Tan Guan and then Dang Tiu Guan. Tan Guan, Dang Tiu Guan. Tan Guan, Dang Tiu Guan. Okay, so he's able to combine it. He can do Tan Guan and Hyun Dim. Right, Tan Guan and Hyun Dim. Okay, and then able to practice the pole more freely. In application, we'll demonstrate that next. In application, what I want to do is I want to move his pole just slightly, create an opening, okay? And then simply strike his hand or strike at his body, okay? What I can also do is, if I don't just guide his force with a little sticking pole exercise, then what I can do is I can also drive his pole away. So by driving his pole away, I use this Tan Guan as a line of projection of force. So I take his pole, get it out of the way, and strike him at the same time, entry with it. Okay? Because I will throw his whole body, even if he's braced and ready for the pole with his body, I will use it because I'm using my weapon as a wedge with my entire body force behind it. Even if he's strong and he has a lot of force in his pole, what happens is, because I concentrate the power at the tip, I'm able to move his whole body. As you can see, I can strike him at will at any point that I want to, just by directing his force. Okay? It's something different than empty hand Wing Chun. All right, the next angle of opportunity that we want to demonstrate is the Gan Guan or But Guan, right? Often in Junim Tao, you use the Gan Guan or Gan Sao in this manner, okay? Or this manner. In Biuji, it's done in this manner, Gan Sao. Okay, it's a sweeping motion on the lower level or lower quadrant. Okay, so what John is using is he's applying it to the pole. He's in the Baizhang position, and then he moves, and he does a But Guan. Okay, so that's the angle of opportunity. We do it again from the beginning, position, and But Guan again, diagonal angle, low sweeping downward. Right, perhaps the 4 o'clock position, 4 or 5 o'clock position, where the pole moves. Let's try it again, a few more times. Holding in position and then moving it. Yes, right? And because John is trained, he has the strength, he doesn't need to brace it against the sternum. Now, if this pole is very, very heavy for him, he's going to have to do the same motion with the pole braced on his chest, okay? As to give him additional bracing force. Okay? All right, then there's various applications to this. So for example, he does the But Guan, and then he does Biu Long, thrusting. He does again But Guan, and then Dang Tiu, right? And he can also do But Guan and then Hyun Dim on top, right? So I'll demonstrate it. Okay, so you move in position. So here and then thrust, here and thrust, here and thrust, and here, Dang Tiu, or But Guan, Dang Tiu, move it, and But Guan, and then Hyun Dim, just turning and strike using the Hyun Dim. So you can see the impetus of force that I strike with is because of my body. Here we're facing off with the pole. If my opponent senses my attention is diverted elsewhere, he might try to strike against my leg. If that's the case, I can just simply hit his hand. If I hit his hand, of course, I will disarm him, okay, or break his fingers, right? I can also slide across the pole where I move across and simply strike downward, right, on his hand. So this is to protect me on the lower angle. But what I can also do is, if I'm sticking poles with him, okay, and he tries to attack me low, okay, what happens is I use the pole to stick with him and then guide it at a low angle. Or, again, like before, if he stabs into my leg or he's just moving, I can simply grab him and strike. I can strike upward. I can knock the pole again. He attacks my leg, right? Strike down on his foot, right? Or he again tries to strike. Right? I move and thrust up on his hand. Or I simply take his pole and then move it. Okay, he strikes, and I guide it, and then I throw his pole by striking down. And I struck his hand and the pole at the same time. All right, so we know those two angles to the right. Now we have other angles of opportunity we need to protect against, okay? So this angle, we're from the center line, we move into the Fuk position, okay? That's like moving to a 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock position with the pole. Again, facing the pole with the Baizhong position, and then moving to 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at the angle, okay? So that's called Fukguan, okay? Subduing the staff, being on top of it. So of course, if you do subduing the staff, easy to strike downward, okay? Fuk, and then stab the opponent, biu, or from Fuk position to dang and strike the foot and lifting upward, or from Fuk also, and then stabbing to the face of the opponent. Right? So you have many different options with this. Okay, any of the 6 basic options or 5 basic options on the first line you can do with this. Okay, Fuk and then strike, Fuk and dang two, Fuk dim two, stab. Okay, so Fukguan is to protect against inside attacks. When the opponent attacks me to this angle, okay, what I have to do is strike his hand. Oh, that's a given. I just simply strike the hand, he's disarmed, right, and then I can hit him at will. Okay? If I want to, I can also guide the pole. I guide the pole is planted, then I strike him with the pole. So here I use tan, so Fuk and tan to strike him with. Right? If I do it again, I knock him to the side, I just simply thrust him. All I have to do is thrust right through him, right? And then it stabs into his throat. Right? I can also come down where I strike against the hand by sliding across the pole. Okay? Wherever his weapon is, I'm able to strike his hand because what? His hand is always holding and controlling the pole. I know at the end, it's easy for me to strike his hand. I don't have to do much more. Okay? So this is Fukguan, getting on top and subduing the opponent. Okay? I can also use it to guide him very softly. He comes in and strikes. I softly guide him. Okay? And then I can simply strike from there. All right. The next motion is Lo Sui. It is the 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock angle. So in position here, I need to move offline. Or if I stay on line, I just use the 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock angle. If I want to, I can also use the sternum to brace me so that I have stronger stability and power. Or I simply move back into a bracing stance or forward stance. Or I simply move back and position myself just by pressing myself in an elongated Wing Chun stance or a forward stance. Okay? All right? From these, I'm able to easily do the basic attacks. Right? And practice them in succession. In application, it's done like this. I simply strike the opponent's hand, or what I do is I make his staff fly. So I move him, then I thrust him, finish him. Okay? Or I position, guide, strike his ankle, or his shin, or his groin, or the back of his knee. The last of these angles is what we call Languan. Languan is where I protect my body and execute and parry or bar my opponent with my pole. So this can be used as a circular motion, or it can be used to push or press or trap an opponent, or I can simply press the position and then strike out. Okay, so that's Languan. All right, so Languan in application. He strikes, and I simply strike his hand and then thrust in. All right, or I guide his position. I guide him outward and then strike him with a Tanguan here. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to the 6.5 point pole. You can see that although the pole these days is a classical martial arts implement, it can still have practical value, especially if you adapt it to everyday objects like what, a broomstick, a pipe, a cane even, or a walking stick, or other types of similar long implements, maybe a pool cue, billiards anything of that sort. All right. So there is value in the classical training of martial arts, and it's been my pleasure to share this with you. Thank you.